Think about the last time you said you couldn't afford something. A dental appointment. A bill you deferred. Now think about what you spent money on that same week. Because the gap between what you said you couldn't afford and what you actually bought, that gap has a name, and it isn't discipline. The standard account of this is pretty straightforward. People who consistently find money for wants but not needs are either undisciplined, or they have confused priorities, or they simply haven't sat down and done the math. The prescription follows naturally from the diagnosis. Make a budget, separate needs from wants, and direct your money intentionally. Financial advisors have been saying this for decades, and they're not wrong, exactly. There is something real in the idea that financial outcomes reflect choices. The person who buys the daily coffee while deferring their electric bill is on some level making a choice. The money is going somewhere. That part of the story is accurate, but the story stops too early. Ori stops. It stops at the behavior and calls it a character flaw. It sees the pattern, wants funded, needs deferred, and concludes that the person simply values comfort over responsibility, that they lack the maturity to delay gratification, that this is, at root, a discipline problem. And when we frame it that way, the implied solution is willpower. Try harder, want it less. Be better. The problem is that this framing ignores what's actually happening in the brain when someone makes these decisions. It treats a neurological process as a moral failing. In that confusion between mechanism and character is where the real misunderstanding lives. Here is the reversalization of branching neural pathways. Deep blue and amber tones, slow movement. Here's the reframe that changes how this looks. Delay discounting is the technical term for something you already know intuitively. A reward available right now feels more valuable than the same reward available later. $100 today feels worth more than $100 in 3 months. This is not a quirk. It is a fundamental feature of how brains evaluate value over time. But here is what the mainstream account misses. Delay discounting is not a fixed trait. It is a state. And certain conditions reliably push that state in a specific direction, toward the immediate, away from the future. One of those conditions is stress, particularly the kind of chronic, low-grade stress that comes from financial precarity itself. When the nervous system is under load, the time horizon collapses. The future becomes cognitively harder to access. What's available now becomes disproportionately attractive, not because of a character defect, but because the brain is running a threat response calculus that was never designed for modern financial decisions. This is where the evolutionary lens becomes useful. This is roughly 200,000-year-old hardware running in a world that changed faster than evolution could follow. For most of human history, discounting the future made sense. The future was genuinely uncertain. The animal that grabbed the resource now survived. The one that waited often didn't. That instinct is not broken. It is just poorly matched to a world where the resource you're deferring is a dental appointment you need to book 3 weeks out. The mismatch is not a flaw. It is a lag. And critically, the greater the financial stress, the more pronounced this lag becomes, which means the people most likely to be caught in the wants not needs pattern are often the people under the most cognitive pressure to break it. The mechanism punishes them twice, once with the stress, and once by making the stress harder to think clearly through. The research on this is more specific than the general principle might suggest. A 2020 study looked at how exposure to acute stress, in this case narratives describing significant loss events, affected delay discounting and consumption behavior. Participants who were exposed to loss-related stress showed measurably increased delay discounting compared to controls. They also showed greater demand for and consumption of immediately rewarding items. The stress didn't just make them feel bad, it changed the computational process by which they evaluated options across time. Forcing Gestang. What makes this finding significant is the mechanism it implies. The shift wasn't driven by a sudden drop in values or a conscious decision to stop caring about the future. It was driven by the state the nervous system was in. The same person, in a calmer state, discounts the future less steeply. Under stress, the curve steepens. The future shrinks. This connects to separate work on striatal function. The striatum, a structure deep in the brain involved in reward processing and motivation, shows altered activity under conditions of chronic stress and negative affect. A 2020 neuroimaging study found that striatal hypofunction correlates with mood alterations in patients experiencing chronic load. The relevance here is indirect but worth noting. The neural systems that evaluate reward and motivate behavior are not static. They shift with the organism's state. A third line of research offers something more actionable. A 2012 study examined whether a specific cognitive intervention, prompting people to think in terms of a concrete future scenario, reduced impulsive decision-making and increased preference for delayed rewards. It did, significantly, not by lecturing participants about discipline, by changing the cognitive frame, by making the future feel more real and proximate. Taken together, these findings suggest something specific. The tendency to fund wants over needs is not primarily a values problem. It is a temporal perception problem, shaped by stress load, modulated by neural state, and, this is the important part, responsive to framing interventions that don't require willpower at all. To be clear about what this evidence does not prove, it does not prove that financial choices are entirely outside conscious control. It does not prove that individual agency is irrelevant. And it does not resolve the genuine complexity of cases where chronic financial stress and chronic impulsive spending exist in a feedback loop that neither cause alone fully explains. The research is pointing at a mechanism. It is not offering a complete account of every person's financial behavior. So what does this mean for how you see your own patterns? If you have ever looked at your bank statement and felt genuinely confused, not guilty, confused, about where the money went, this is part of the answer. The purchases that felt justified in the moment weren't random. They were the brain doing something it was built to do under conditions of stress. Reach for what's available now, because now is the only time horizon that feels real. The linguist's version of this is worth sitting with for a moment. When you say "I can't afford it" about a dentist appointment, but then spend that same amount across a week of smaller purchases, the sentence "I can't afford it" is doing strange work. It's not describing a resource constraint. It's describing a motivational one. A more precise sentence might be, "The future cost of not doing this hasn't been made real enough to compete with what I'm feeling right now." That's uncomfortable to say, but it's more accurate. And accurate is useful in a way that vague isn't. The implication isn't to try harder. The implication is to work with the mechanism rather than against it. Making the future more concrete, not as an abstraction, but as a vivid, specific scenario, appears to shift the discounting curve without requiring heroic willpower. That is a different kind of intervention than a budget. It's a perceptual one. Here is the tension that doesn't fully resolve. Even if all of this is correct, even if the wants not needs pattern is driven by a stress-induced collapse in future time perception, it still produces real consequences. Bills still accumulate, health still deteriorates. The mechanism being understandable doesn't make the outcomes less costly. And there's a version of this framework that could be misused, that could become an explanation that functions as an excuse. The line between understanding a mechanism and using that understanding to stop expecting change at all is not always obvious. What the research doesn't settle is this: at what point does understanding the neuroscience become a reason to change the environment? And at what point does it become a reason to stop expecting change at all? That question sits at the intersection of psychology, economics, and ethics, and it doesn't have a clean answer. The honest place to leave this is probably here. The pattern is real, the mechanism is real, the judgment was premature. What you do with that is still yours to figure out. The research behind this video draws from Neuroimage, Psychology of Addictive Behaviors, Journal of the Society of Psychologists in Addictive Behaviors, British Journal of Psychology, London, England, 1953. Every claim traces to a published source. Full citations are in the description below. If the way this channel thinks about neuroscience resonates with you, subscribing helps this work reach people who'd appreciate it. New videos on the science of mind every